The Prime Minister says the government will take another look at options to make sure a fuel shortage that's grounded hundreds of flights at Auckland Airport doesn't happen again. Thousands of air travellers are facing delays after a digger struck the only pipeline carrying jet fuel from Marsden Point in Northland to the airport. Opposition parties have pounced on the shortage on the campaign trail today, saying the government was warned about the potential risk years ago but chose to ignore it. Anusha Bradley reports.
In 2012, Air New Zealand urged the government to help establish a new fuel storage terminal in West Auckland and turn the Wiri terminal near the airport into a dedicated jet fuel storage site. In a cabinet paper that same year, the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment agreed a new terminal would improve the resilience of Auckland's fuel supply chain. But the government decided the $57 million cost of setting one up was too expensive. On the campaign trail in Whanganui today, Labour leader Jacinta Ardern said air travellers are now paying the price for that decision.
It does look like that infrastructure was critical and needed. And certainly we're seeing the upshot of that infrastructure not existing. We need to make sure that we're resilient. We need to make sure we've got backup plans when issues like this arise. The fact that one digger can cause our international travel to be ground to a halt shows how vulnerable that infrastructure was, and the National Government ignored that.
The former Labour government was aware of the risks too. A 2005 report commissioned by the then Ministry for Economic Development identifies the single pipe from Marsden Point to Auckland as an issue. In Napier, the Prime Minister Bill English says the government will take another look at the advice.
Well, I'm sure they're going to go back and look hard at it. There's been a couple of studies done that looked at different alternatives for backing up the current infrastructure, and the decisions were made that the investment that would be required to double up would be too much and be passed on to consumers. But I'd expect that after this, they'll go back and have another look at it.
The Greens leader, James Shaw, says the government's failure to provide critical infrastructure is negligent.
Even though it's private, it's a private company and so on, I think that the government does have a hand in ensuring that critical infrastructure is protected and that the risks are managed. And so I would say that if they chose not to do that on the basis that it was a purely private venture, then they were being negligent.
Up to 80,000 litres, or about 2 tanker loads of jet fuel, was spilled when the pipeline ruptured near reoccur on Thursday. But Refining NZ says most of it's been cleaned up and the contaminated soil removed. James Shaw says the Northern Regional Council and Refining NZ must prove there's been no environmental damage. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says the crisis shows the importance of a railway line between Marsden Point and Auckland, and he's dismissing Bill English's suggestions that a second fuel pipeline or more storage might be needed.
The second pipeline will be the silliest idea I've ever heard. In fact, you can build a whole railway line for that, and that's what I'm saying. And as for storage, in these days of terrorism, the more storage you got near the airport, the more dangerous things would be.
Refining NZ says repairs are being hampered by highly explosive fuel and vapour in the pipeline, and the earliest any jet fuel will be arriving in Auckland Airport via the pipeline will be Wednesday next week. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.